Welcome. I'm Anthony Arnove, the editorial director of the independent nonprofit publisher Haymarket Books. We're really honored to host this Haymarket Live event with Naomi Klein, Chenjerai Kumanyika, Astra Taylor, and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. We're at a critical moment for the left to clarify our project and chart a collective path forward. And to do this, we'll need to build an infrastructure of dissent and renew our commitment to political education and a politics of solidarity. We appreciate everyone who made a solidarity donation in registering for this program, and hope everyone watching will consider becoming a Haymarket Book Club member, buying books directly through our website, haymarketbooks.org, subscribing to our Haymarket Live YouTube channel and podcast, and making a year-end donation to our work, including our program of free books for readers who are incarcerated and other political education programs. You'll see information about how to do all this in our chat window. I could say so much more about our speakers, but I want to just make sure we take full advantage of our time together, and I'll just briefly mention a few biographical notes here that are especially relevant. Naomi Klein is an award-winning journalist and New York Times-bestselling author, a columnist with The Guardian, and in 2021, she joined the University of British Columbia as UBC Professor of Climate Justice and co-director of the Center for Climate Justice. Her newest book, which is just out in paperback, is the New York Times-bestseller Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. Chenjerai Kumanyika teaches nonfiction audio journalism and podcasting at New York University. He is the host, co-creator, co-executive producer of Uncivil, a podcast on the Civil War, and creator and host of the new podcast, Empire City, an 8-part narrative series investigating the complicated and largely invisible history of the New York Police Department. Astra Taylor is a writer, filmmaker, and political organizer. Her books include the American Book Award winner, The People's Platform, The Age of Insecurity, and with Leah Hunt Hendricks, Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea. She is also the co-founder of the Debt Collective. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor is the author of From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation and How We Get Free, as well as Race for Profit. She co-edited Our History Has Always Been Contraband with Robin G.G. Kelley and Colin Kaepernick. She's a contributing writer at The New Yorker. And with that, I'm pleased to hand things off to Chenjerai to kick off this evening's conversation.
What's going on, everybody? I'm so excited that we can be here together at this crucial moment. I know it's a lot of y'all who are logged in and logging in, that are fam, that we've worked together, we've been in the streets, we struggled together, we've studied together. So shout out to all of you all. And again, I'm glad that we have this space to take a little bit of time with these questions. Social media is great, blue skies popping off, but we need some time for some longer conversations right now. And I'm glad to be here with my comrades to do that as we all try to figure our way forward. I'm just going to say a few remarks. I don't know that I have some kind of definitive take. One thing I will say is that I was in a thread. I'm sure we were all on multiple threads, watching, processing, doom chatting, whatever we were doing as things unfolded. But I was with these folks. I was with my comrades here in the thread, and they were helping us to sort of come to grips with things as they unfold. So there's a few things I want to say right off the gate. Number one, we saw what happened with this election. We saw that Donald Trump won the election. There's not a debate about whether he won. He won. And we also saw that, the House, the Senate, these things have gone red, and we also saw tremendous rightward shifts in places that were surprising to a lot of folks. And I think that as I saw people processing that, one thing occurred to me at one point, which is that, for example, when you see the way that people were talking about I don't know if it actually was increased support among Black men, but the support you saw among Black men, demographics like Black men, Latino men, there was like some throwing under the bus that was happening that I saw, on one hand. But I found myself actually really interested in those very questions. Like, wow, these particular groups. I think the thing that stood out for me right off the gate was why in an election when it was clear that just as the majority of white Americans have elected Republicans for every election that I can remember, like I don't feel like white people don't elect Democrats in America. Just as that was occurring, but I really was curious about what happened in places like Queens, what happened in these communities. And I realized that the reason why I was confused, really interested in that, was not because I was interested in throwing Latino men or black men under the bus, but it was because there's two kinds of questions we have to confront. One is a kind of descriptive questions, and I hope I'm not like nerding out too much for y'all, but one are like descriptive questions to understand what actually occurred here, right? What really is this data telling us about who did what? And and I think that that's important to tease out. And that was the vein of one set of questions. And in that vein, I felt like some of the information was a little distorted because there was so much conversation about these groups that people were surprised about that we sometimes didn't look at what was actually maintained and continually reproduced. And we certainly aren't looking sufficiently at the limitations of the Democratic Party. So we're going to come back to that, I'm sure. But the other kinds of questions were organizing questions, right? Because for me, those same groups, a lot of them are people in my community. These are the people that I feel like I have to organize with. These are the people that there's people in my family. And I know that's the case for a lot of us. And so no matter, putting aside whatever rage or anger people might have about those results, I don't think it's a responsible organizing take to get mad per se at those voters and have that be your political takeaway. I think we have to take responsibility for this as an organizing task. We have to, as our brother Robin D.G. Kelly said, we have to ask, why are some of these ideas so attractive in certain sectors of our community? And I think that really does require us to look closely at that question in a way that's not about blaming folks. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is that I know so many of us at this moment, people are like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It feels like a tsunami is about to hit us, and it is. And we were already in various crises, polycrisis, as the comrade has said. But it's like, I think one thing that's really important is to remember, you get on these panels, and sometimes people feel like we have to solve the problem of the left in abstraction, right? Before we can actually confront the things that are right in front of us. And the truth is that there are a lot of battles that have been already in motion and that are now intensified that are directly in front of us. And I mean, so in terms of what we're going to do, for me, in a way, like a big part of it is like what's in front of you. For me, one way I'm looking at this has to do with the field of higher education. Higher education I'm speaking as a member. I'm currently actually right now in DC with the AAUP, right, where our slate has taken over the AAUP because we understand the attacks that higher education is in. One important thing that we have to learn from this election, I think on one sense, is that we do need to be looking far beyond our campuses to really understand what's going on in America and how the left needs to become stronger. But we also have to look at higher education, and we're committed to making higher education a central node in that, because when it comes to, all the different crises, I mean, people's loans, our students, the way that they're trying to attack the research related to the humanities, all the sort of institutions and nodes inside the academy that are supporting Palestinian liberation, those are probably going to come under attack through Title VI discrimination things that will try to claim anybody who essentially we don't like, the Trump administration doesn't like their politics as some kind of terrorism. So these things are real now. The budgeting and funding cuts, we were already kind of in a real funding crisis, or just maybe education under capitalism, public education under capitalism. But those things are going to get more intense. More of those budgets are going to get cut. And so we were already going to have to mass up. And the AAUP is putting on organizing for power workshops. We just got finished having a huge call. We had 300 people from chapters all over the country getting on the same page about what our theory of change is, getting ready to recruit and bring people into our union drives. So there's things that are already ongoing. And I would say for all of you, if you're at a loss, we'd get a moment to mourn. It's not like I'm not trying to come here and make this pitch like we don't have time to mourn, folks. We got to work. No, we got to also mourn while we work. We got to make space for that. But at the same time, there are concrete battles in all these areas, reproductive justice, climate justice, that we can take on right now. And I hope that in the Q&A and through this conversation, we can point to some of those areas. So the last thing I want to say is that right now, if there was ever any pressure to kind of like soft pedal the severe limitations and horrific ideological project of the Democratic Party, we are no longer in that moment right now, right? We have to speak very clearly about what this party has been about. I was just talking to someone the other day and saying I watched all these people freak out because Trump has appointed Tom Homan, but no one seems to want to talk about the fact that Tom Homan was also Obama's immigration person for a period of time. And so we have to really talk about what occurred. But I'm hoping that also we can develop a vocabulary to help us talk about the Democrats, because sometimes when we talk about the Democrats, if we're talking about the DNC at the national level, it's true that the national Democrats do tend to set the narrative. But it's also true that there are a lot of people who understand the limitations of the Democratic Party, who probably want to move beyond the Democratic Party, but are voting as Democrats and supporting Democratic campaigns because at the local level, at this point, that's where we're at right now. That's what's available to them. A friend of mine said it's almost like, the metaphor of like the way you're running around looking for something you used to be able to buy at a small local business, and now you got to go to the Walmart Supercenter to buy even really basic things. So it's like, anyway, I think that I'm interested to hear what people have to say about the vocabulary we need to describe the Democratic Party, get at these limitations, and then talk about ultimately the longer term project of building something new. We have to get good at thinking about campaigns that are going to be longer than 1 or 2 election cycles. The fight against Roe v. Wade was like a 50-year battle. It's like, so I don't want to get into praising our opponents, but they play long-term ball. What is the left going to do? So I'll just stop it right there and turn it over to my colleagues. But those are just some thoughts that are on my mind. And again, welcome you all. So who's next up in the list? Is it going to be Naomi or Astra? Astra? Okay.
I think I got the second straw. Hey, y'all. Very good to see everybody. Thanks for that, Chenjerai, and thanks to everyone who's tuning in. I also haven't got a totally seamless narrative for what's happening. I'm also processing so much of this. But, I think before we start talking about, where we go from here, I think it's good to think about how we got here. And right now there is a debate happening within and around the Democratic Party over who messed up, who's responsible for this, and from there, right, what's the path forward? And I think this blame game is actually an important thing for us to engage in, because establishment Democrats are, of course, trying to blame the left for the fact that Harris did not win the election. And I think, it's important to come out and just be like, no, that's not what happened. Harris ran a campaign that tacked to the right, that propped up unpopular people like Liz Cheney, that took her base for granted, and that did not speak to the frustrated sentiments that are so widespread, and to the fact that and basically gaslit people and told them that everything was great, and that they should be feeling joy amid a lot of chaos and hardship. And I think that this is important because it just reminds us how needed the left is, actually, because in this moment of trying to figure out how to blame the left for this, what this idea that always pops up, a kind of zombie idea that what we need to do is like make gestures towards economic populism, throwing immigrants, throwing trans people under the bus, somehow separating identity from economics, right? This idea is, it's been around for as long as I've been politically aware. There has been always like a crop of white political guys talking about how identity politics ruins everything. And, they're back with vengeance right now. Their solution isn't going to win, because the economic populism they're talking about isn't sincere. It's not tethered to a deep systemic critique of capitalism. It isn't rooted in real solidarity that refuses to treat any group of people as disposable. It's not rooted in real moral values. And so I think this is a moment actually to be like, the left is really needed right now. We have real systemic solutions. We understand the way economics and identity are intertwined. I also, one thing that keeps occurring to me as I read these discussions too, where, some people, again, powerful players in and around the Democratic Party are talking about the fact they might need to switch their messaging a bit and be a bit more populist or change the messenger a bit, maybe go back to having a white guy talk about stuff, is that ultimately this isn't about messengers and messaging. This is about building real power to manifest policies that improve people's lives. It's about grounding a vision. Like, vision is good. I'd prefer to have a party that had an inclusive vision, but that vision does really need to be grounded. And that's, I think, our job, right? Is how do we build the coalition, the organization, the infrastructure that could actually win the things that people need and deserve. So, I feel as committed as ever to organizing with the Debt Collective. I feel like these are moments when we need to really think about our organizing as a way of building connections and bonds and relationships between people, building real solidarity, less in terms of quick wins. And related to that, I just wrote a piece, maybe I'll mention this and then close out. Challenging the ideas, and one thing that is also going around in the discourse is the idea that Trump had no ground game. The Republicans had no ground game. This is something that we've been hearing for months, and even after Kamala Harris lost, a lot of Democratic strategists repeated it. And implicit was that the Democrats had this great ground game. It was professional. They had a well-oiled, data-driven machine. And what they meant by that was basically like, we knock doors twice and try to have one-off conversations to turn people off. And then we text people a lot, like to the point that they turn their phones off. We text them so much. And then, we spend billions of dollars in ads, right? That is not a freaking, it's bullshit, right? That's not how it's an instrumental transactional way of treating people. So the Republicans did that kind of stuff. They targeted, low and mid propensity voters. They went out, tried to reach people who didn't fit the usual demographic. But then they also did things that when you go back and read the press about it, that experts were like, how befuddling. They're actually trying to build these relationships and help people, adopt an identity and making commitments and asking folks to wear these hats and reach out to 10 or 20 friends, right? This much more sort of all-encompassing kind of identity formation. And that was built on top of this 40, 50-year grand plan, right? To seize the courts, to invest in an agenda of deregulation, to attack unions, right? So it was that sort of long game on top of a ground game that was just more relational, more all-encompassing than the data-driven text messaging based one that the Democrats pulled off. I guess, and so in writing this piece, I started to look at places where folks were organizing at a different, deeper level. I'm thinking about Minnesota, where there's a group called Faith in Action. Thinking about groups that organized in rural Washington, for example. And these are places where people went out, did deeper long-term organizing, and were able to maybe not, push Harris over the line. I don't think that should be the goal of their organizing, but were able to do things like, hold make sure that the state legislature didn't flip to the Republicans, to pass really progressive anti-billionaire ballot measures, right? And to also get folks in coalition who were from very different backgrounds, mobile home residents alongside Muslim American communities, immigrant workers alongside, folks who's white people who have been in rural Washington for generations. And that deeper kind of organizing did pay, again, when you look at the data, as you said to do, pay different kinds of electoral dividends. So I think when we parse things, Trump didn't win in a landslide ultimately. A lot of people are not deeply committed to MAGA. And there are ways actually to, I think, to connect with folks and just to keep building power. And I think you're exactly right, that Chenjerai, that longer horizon now has to be the one that we're thinking about.
Okay.
I think it was Naomi next.
I'm next. Yeah. It was great listening to both of you. And I think maybe we'll respond a little bit more in the next go around to what each other said, but I definitely agreed with a lot. And I appreciate, Astra, that you've been out there playing the blame game. I agree that it really does matter. And, that's why Bernie was right out of the gate, setting the terms a little bit. And I really appreciated that. And it forced people to react and get very upset. But I think he knows that it really does matter. I do think there's something to unpack around exactly what people mean when they talk about woke, right, and identity politics. I don't think we're all meaning the same thing necessarily. I think some of it is just kind of affect. Like some of it is just like expressing a feeling of these are people who think they're better than us. This is like a kind of a judgmental feeling. And I think that this comes from the fact that, Keeanga wrote a whole book about the Combahee River Collective and the original meaning of identity politics. And that is not the form of identity politics that the Democratic Party and most liberal elites co-opted. They co-opted the cheapest parts of identity politics, i.e. things that didn't cost money from billionaires, and did what Olufemi Taiwo has said, like deferential, representational, not redistributive, not structural change, not transformation. And I think that combination is really bad. And I think we do need to spend some time with that. And so, as you all know, just from our text thread, a lot of what I've been trying to sit with, I don't think this is just about the Democratic Party. There's something deeper going on here when you look at what Trump was able to cobble together in this multiracial coalition. I've been listening to Steve Bannon for a long time because of the research that I was doing about what I call the mirror world. He calls it inclusive nationalism. This has been building for a long time. And the very fact that this was surprising speaks to the fact that we're too cut off. It should not have been surprising. Nothing this big should have been surprising. So part of what I've been thinking about is just, okay, well, what is it? Like if a lot of this was just a middle finger to people perceived as elites or people who were perceived as judgy or prissy or whatever, unkind, what have not just liberals but leftists done to drive people to the Trump camp? So I have some thoughts on that, but this has been what I've been struggling with, because I don't think we should gloss over that message, because if the left was doing its job, people would be coming to the left. They wouldn't be going to Trump, right? And now after the election, some people are, but and Keeanga wrote this earlier, but the irrelevance of the left in this election campaign is something we need to reckon with, because it reflects our power. On the upside, the ICC issued arrest warrants today for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and that is the result of a lot of organizing. It's also an incredible organizing tool. So just thinking about, as we move forward, the ICC is not going to be enforcing that, but this can play out in local courts for countries that are signatories to the ICC, in the way that Chile, Spain went after Pinochet, right? This has opened up a lot of possibilities, and even in the U.S., which isn't a signatory to the ICC, it's still a very, very powerful tool for organizing for BDS, and I think choosing really powerful targets that are coalition builders. So here I'm sort of thinking about, where do we go from here, and where do we start building from? And I think that maybe it doesn't start with like, okay, we need a new party. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think partly what we need to be doing is finding common ground and really and I think it sounds like a good idea, but what is the basis? Like, what are the values that animate it? How are we going to come together? So I think this ICC ruling is an incredibly important tool to continue to fight to end the genocide. Let's not forget that is paramount. Ending occupation, ending apartheid from the river to the sea. These are things that we have to be fighting for. And I think we need to do more to connect the dots between all of these issues that we're engaged with. I think as somebody whose sort of main work is around climate justice, I think there was a feeling for the first few months of this genocidal campaign that this was, okay, it's got to stop, and then we'll get back to climate, and now what I think a lot of us understand is we have to integrate, right? We have to draw out the connections and the mindset and the logic that allows the planet to cook and allows Palestine to burn, right? And it is, it is the hierarchy of humanity. It is the, it is the people who believe that they will be okay in their fortresses, or their spare planets in the case of Elon Musk, or their bunkers or whatever it is. But it is this extreme, what Arundhati Roy talks about, like the rich actually seceding from planet Earth. And it's not that they're going to other planets. It's that they really live on their own planet here, right? But I think in the face of that kind of mass death, to me, the left needs to be standing on the side of life. I mean, we need to be pro-life. If I'm not sure it might be too soon to reclaim that slogan, but I really deeply believe that we need to be asserting in everything we do that we believe that all life is precious, that no one is disposable, no one is sacrificable, and have these, and part of the reason why I think we need to do this, and by the way, I don't think these are weak, soft, liberal principles. I think we need to look nowhere, whether it's housing, healthcare, border, Gaza, asserting the sacredness of life, the preciousness of life is extremely radical and transformational if we really believe it. But the other thing about sort of leading with those types of core values is it's harder to be misunderstood. And one of the things that I really noticed in this campaign was the way the slogans of the left have been twisted and filled with their opposite meanings again and again on the right. And part of that is just that we're always going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to the information wars. Like, we don't own our own TV networks, right? So we have to stress test our comms, like our communication, our narrative, to ask ourselves, how will this be misunderstood? And I just don't think that, and if it's easy, if it's too easy, that's not a good framework, And I think that we come up with slogans that are like understandable with 8 footnotes. And that's just wild because we don't have the power to explain ourselves in that way. So I think we need to really just lead with values and then look for ways to manifest those values. Ending genocide is one. And for me, it's first and foremost. When it comes to climate, I've been trying to spread this phrase, eco-populism. I am an eco-socialist, but once again, I think eco-populism is sort of a better framing for the kinds of climate policies that would just be really damn popular right now. Because one of the things that we saw in this election is that climate was nowhere, which is unbelievable considering what's happening with wildfires and storms, during the election campaign. And Harris barely touched it because it has been made so toxic and has been successfully equated with the Davos elites on the right. So they're afraid of talking about climate. So we need to say climate policy means free transit for all. Climate transit means, your rent's going to be lower, and you're going to have a free heat pump delivered to your house and installed for free. Like, really universalist programs that are lowering daily costs and breaking through in a really concrete way this idea that you have to choose between caring about the sustainability of our one and only home, despite what Elon Musk says, and being able to pay for groceries, being able to survive, right? So I think we need both of those things, like this sort of big narrative work, and rooted in values, and very clear, concrete policies that we fight for. And I think Astra does this with the Debt Collective. But it's the storytelling and reasserting over and over again. It's because we believe that, we believe no one should be thrown away. And the fact that we haven't done that is going to hurt us when these deportations start, right? And the fact that Kamala Harris fought this election claiming she was tougher on the border is a disaster. And also the fact that they continue to support this genocide with more weapons and more money. Because, allowing huge numbers of people to die on your watch or be killed on your watch, it's a habit, and so that is like why I think that we need to get so basic in terms of what our values are. I'm curious to hear what you think, because, I know this can be dismissed as soft, but I'm just really worried that if we aren't out there using every sort of platform that we have to assert, our universal humanity, and the sanctity of life, and that's not just human life, then we're not going to be able to revive people's spirits, right? Because I think that part of what happened with Trump in this election is just people being so worn down that it was, it's just, I'm going to protect me and mine. And, one of the things I know from paying too much attention to Steve Bannon is that mass deportations are economic policy. And their economic policy that is being pitched to immigrant communities. Everyone was so busy laughing about black jobs. What's a black job? Is it Simone Biles? That they didn't actually engage with what was being said, right? That this is a way to open up jobs, low wage jobs, but jobs. And maybe they can be made better, I've really been struck listening to Bannon. They're having these big debates about whether they're going to deport enough people for this to successfully be an economic program, right? And this is what fascism does. It was an economic program to get rid of the Jews and take all their stuff and redistribute it. It was a fascist form of wealth redistribution. And I think we're seeing that now, and we never engaged with it. We just laughed about it, or we said it was racist, which of course it was. But I don't think we were understanding why it resonated. And I think it resonated because we're very, very deep into, a negative reinforcing cycle of 50 years of neoliberal compounding precarity. And now, it's feeding on itself. So I'm going to end there. But I was trying to be more hopeful. But all right.
Okay. It's very good to be with you all. We were together, I think, 2 or 3 weeks before the election, and not quite predicting that Trump would win, but really the missteps of the Democratic Party were quite obvious when we got together in October. And so I think I've described it as surprising, but not shocking. Of course, it's surprising because Trump ran an openly racist, proto-fascist, xenophobic, deeply disturbing and dystopic race. And so, that it's always jolting, just as it was, not in the same way, but just as it was in 2016 when he won. I think, I as all of us have been thinking about what happened, but why. But one of the things that I've been really kind of irritated, annoyed by is the kind of attempt to have a quick pivot into hashtag resistance 2024, as if to say we can just pick up the baton from the end of the last Trump presidency and pick up where things left off. And I think Al Sharpton has called for a march in Washington. I think I saw something about a women's march in January, and it's irritating because I mean on multiple levels, but I'll go through some of them. I think probably the most important thing is there are all kinds of explanations, hot takes, cold takes now circulating about what happened. But to me, what is most striking is that whatever constitutes the left in this country can't even cohere around a common understanding of what happened. Meaning that for some, and this is call it the progressive movement, the left broadly construed, but there is the anger at Black men, at Muslims. Some of the stuff on social media is just shocking and appalling. Enjoy your deportation. You're going to fuck around and find out. And now you're about to find out. Attacks on the Muslim community. Dearborn, wishing bad things to happen to Arabs and Muslims in the state of Michigan for not falling into line. And these are people who would consider themselves, who see themselves as liberals. There's different rants about whose fault it was. Is it the white left, white progressives? So the point being that how do we pivot to talk about the new resistance when we don't even understand what just happened, why it happened, and how it happened? And so to that end, I think that the culture, the political culture in this country that has a deep strain of anti-intellectualism, a resistance to political debate, to political education, to political engagement in a way that is designed to come towards some kind of common understanding. It doesn't mean a common agreement and that we all think the same way and have the same understanding about what happened, but that there is a level of engagement that takes seriously different strains of thought and experience that begins to develop the foundation upon which we can come together, upon which we can develop some practices of solidarity that don't just feel cheap and altruistic or even transactional, but that come through a deep understanding of the pain, the suffering, the hopes of what has happened in the past, but what the future can be. And so I think that to me, this is troubling because it feels like at a moment where we know what is happening, we know what is about. Those people on the right are not shocked or surprised in the way that they were in 2016. They're prepared. They have been preparing. They have a plan, Project 2025, and so they know what their plans are. We all know that the deportation are real. Like Stephen Miller will die trying to deport as many people as humanly possible. It's not an empty campaign promise. We know that the attacks on the political left, on academics, on people who talk about politics, talk about these things. We know that those things are happening. We know the suffering that is going to happen with these threats to strip down the state, to strip down the services offered by the state in the name of getting rid of red tape, in the name of efficiency, in the name of regenerating the economy. And yet, at the same time, it feels like our side is not really prepared to respond in a way that is not just effective, but in a way that tries to create on-ramps and easy entry for people who are angry, who are radicalizing, because people who voted for Trump because they're pissed off, because they're sick of the puffed up suits of the Democratic Party spitting in their face, telling them nonsense and bullshit. Those people are radicalized. People who voted for Trump because they think that he's rich, he's a businessman, maybe he can figure it out, because I've had the same crappy job 3 administrations in a row. Those people are radicalized, but where will they go? And so sometimes it feels like our side doesn't understand that there is a struggle for these people, and that the right, the forces of the right, are also strategizing for what narrative, what explanation, what set of stories do we concoct to put together to provide an explanation for the state of your world. And so we can't just keep telling people to either, it's not my job to educate you, you go figure it out, I'm tired. The New York Times had some ridiculous story about some group of Black women who've decided that they're going to go rest. They're tired. Well, it's nice to actually be in a position to be tired and to be able to disengage. But there are a lot of people who don't have the ability to be tired, to disengage, and to just go off and do something else. But the point is, if we don't rebuild a left that is habitable, hospitable to regular people, then we're going to have a problem. Because the resistance can't just be, it can't be people who are already integrated into political organizing, activism, and the left. And so I think, where do we go from here, or what is next? I think that we really have to try to wrap our minds and understanding around what happened in this election that is not, that really just tries to understand how Black men, how Latino men, how working class white men and women were attracted to what Trump was saying. And part of that, I think, is recognizing, and this is really where the Democrats' focus on joy was so appalling, if not disgusting. not only because there is an active genocide underway in Gaza. And so what the hell are you talking about? But also that it just seemed to be a complete lack of awareness about the extraordinary suffering that exists in this country. And part of that was inbuilt because they're running on, we fixed the economy. We've got the best economy in the world after the pandemic. And so if you're running on that, if that's your campaign message and you're an incumbent, then it makes it actually difficult to appreciate, reflect, see, empathize with the tremendous amount of suffering that exists in this country. And so I think whatever strategy is underway, I mean, there's more to say about the left as an organizing entity offering no resistance to Harris, and in some cases endorsing Harris within minutes after she announced her candidacy, but offering, when she's making horrendous statements about maintaining the world's most lethal military, not having a word to say, when she's chuckling at Trump's racist comments about Haitians as if to just dismiss this as, oh, he's just so extreme, and having nothing to say about that is a problem. And so I think there's a lot to unpack, there's a lot to talk about, but first it's about really trying to understand what the actual state of life is in this country, and how is that related to what happened into this in this campaign, and what the left needs to do as a broadly construed entity to engage with that, to create on-ramps, easy entry points for people to begin to organize, to develop a sense of politics, history, how that shapes our strategy and tactics for what we're going to be doing in the next coming months.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughts on this. And I really agree with so much of what you've said. And I do want to say one thing that I just, before we go to the next thing, I just want to say one of the things that I think exists in some parts of the left is one way to say this, but probably not broad enough, is a culture where we can really assess our own limitations and areas where we got to get better without it being taken as an attack on any particular person, right? We have to be able to receive critique. We have to be able to say, like, yeah, look, I didn't do this thing well enough. And sometimes I worry about our ability to even hear it, because even whenever I see someone, saying like, here's a way we have to grow, I can just hear the voices in my head of somebody saying, I was already doing that. What? You ain't talking to me? And all these other kinds. It's like, no, if you was already doing it, good. All right. We no one here is, we champion, we celebrate you, all of that. But if we don't have a culture we can figure out, like, and be able to say, like, what are we not getting right? What do we need to do better? Then we can't be saying we're serious. So please, anyone who feels like you already understood all these things and you got it all figured out, this is not an attack on you. But I can say, I know for me, the morning after the election, as somebody who definitely thought Trump was going to win, all the things that, my comrades here are saying this stuff and with a lot more sophistication, but I really felt like, wow, okay, there's some stuff I have to learn, and I have to try to do better. But do people want to respond to any of the things that just got said? We have some interesting questions from the audience. Does anybody have a response to some of the things that we just put out there?
Well, I just wanted, I would love to just heartily agree with what Keeanga said about the need for good faith debate, like the need to hold on to the possibility that that we actually can have disagreements and we can still be part of the same movement, and healthy movements have that capacity. And I think that's the thing that worries me most. And I think it's the way that we've been most infected by social media is, people, like, as soon as a take is shared, it can get denounced with such a fury that it ends it, right? And then people start self-censoring. So I think we have to figure out how to do that. I joined Blue Sky. It's so far like way less trolly than Twitter, but I don't think this is a social media thing. Like, I think this is something that this needs to happen in person. I think we can do some of it, through forums like this. But even just the way television is now, there's no real debate. There's no disagreement. Maybe you have like a token right winger or a token left winger, but like everyone knows you're not actually changing minds or whatever. So I think we should really think about how to do that and how to model it. And yeah, that's the main thing I wanted to add. Just looking at my notes.
Astra, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just briefly, like, I know you're saying, shouting out the people who are like, I'm already doing that. But I do think, for me, even reporting a little bit on this story and looking at the organizations that are not big on social media, but that are embedded in communities, that are organizing across difference, that are trying to reach people who either, maybe are sympathetic to MAGA or ultimately like voted for the couch in this three-way election, right? Because 90 million people who were eligible to vote didn't vote, or split their ticket or whatever, or just, who are not strongly ideological. Like, most people aren't clearly on the left or the right. Like, we have, lots of different opinions on things. And I think I'd like to see the left pay more attention to organizers and folks who are actually trying to tether some of our big ideas to the ground and figure out, like, what can we actually do? What strategies can we actually engage people with? What kind of political education actually works? Which, I agree with Naomi's point that we can't dismiss the critique of smugness, right? And there's a kind of temptation. I mean, the Trump administration is like, the people being nominated for these cabinet, they're really stupid. It's painful, but I don't think you fight stupid with smart in a condescending way, right? You fight it with sincerity, with being straightforward, with talking with those values.
Also, by the way, Astra, have to recognize, and I don't think we're doing this enough, is that the stupidity is smart. If your goal is to dismantle the administrative state, like, it's actually smart, and we don't give them credit for that. But they are rendering the government absurd, and if your goal is to destroy the government, it's very smart. It's very smart.
Well, and what they've done is they've made the, like, old Grover Norquist threat to drown the government in the bathtub, like, hip and cool with some memes, but it's exactly the same. It's the same project repackaged. So yes, I agree.
It's like living in a cartoon when the Matt Getz nomination for the AG comes across Linda McMahon from the WWE to the Department of Education, Robert F. Kennedy, who I made a joke about this, on election night, that Trump's going to appoint him the head of HHS just because it was so absurd. And that's clearly part of the motivation, is to own the libs and to consciously put incompetent people into these positions, or people who are so vested in whatever private sector they are coming out of, to capture and completely undermine the agency itself. And so, I think, this is just bad. It's bad.
And the more incompetent and terrible government is. I mean, again, these folks, Dr. Oz, it turns out he's diehard dedicated to privatizing Medicare, right? So he has this agenda. But, badly run government serves their purpose because it increases distrust, right? It increases the sense that things don't work and that politicians are corrupt. And we as the left broadly, as disorganized as we are, in a very tough position then of trying to inspire people to imagine a world where the state serves their basic needs in a way that's somewhat functional. And I worry about I've been saying that just because Elon Musk now is, leading the charge against government inefficiency, that we can't polarize ourselves and suddenly be pro inefficiency, right? Like we have to be pro universal, functional, generous, eco-populism, to use your new term, Naomi.
Yeah. One thing I do think that, there are a lot of places in the movement where you see people working through the kinds of things we need to work through to sort of mass up a little bit, because I do think that was one of the key takeaways, and I hear versions of that. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but we need more people. We need to become bigger, and I think we need to have more entry points, honestly. My comrade Demetrius Noble says we need more entry points into our struggle. Everybody's not going to come. I was deeply involved in the encampments. Most of us were in the protests. Everybody's not going to come to a protest in an encampment like that. Everybody's not going to come to a talk that's already set up in scholarly left radical language that for a lot of folks is alienating, quite frankly. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think, but there are some places out there, there's a film that we're trying to, get distributed more about the formation of the Amazon labor union. And, with this film, I think, Astra, you were talking about this at the last event. I mean, it really is a depiction. Listen, this is not about reducing us to say labor is our only strategy. But when you talk about people being there day after day, we're talking about diverse folks who come from all kinds of difference, right? Different religions, different ethnicities, probably different political beliefs, right? But they had to work through it together over a long period of time to get to a goal. So it meant talking to folks. It did mean having that patience, right? To talk to folks who probably on some other areas you really disagree with because you want to forge this goal. And I think those kind of campaigns are exciting. There's all kinds of things to be bracketed about the MLS labor union and who they're partnered with and all those things we need to work through. But I think that idea, there's lessons in there beyond simply labor organizing, which has to be key because of the ability to create leverage that labor has, where some of these other strategies don't have the same ability to create the same kind of leverage. But there's also just lessons about how to be with people, how to talk to people across difference that I think I find encouraging. I just wanted to say that.
I do think that a lot of the questions, issues, complaints, or whatever about the organizing culture won't necessarily be resolved in the abstract. I think that there are opportunities now. I think a lot of people want to talk. I think there is a desire to understand what happened, even if that is not necessarily connected to doing something. Although I do think that once Trump is inaugurated, and this is less kind of anticipation of things to come, and I have no doubt that they will hit the ground running, just as they did before with the Muslim ban within days. I'm sure they're mapping out where to strike first with deportations and the kind of shock and awe strategy of 2017. And so, I think that there will be multiple opportunities to act. But I think now there is an opportunity to be in conversations and discussions like this, but also in person, where people want to try to understand. And so I think, it's hard to say what is the thing to do. But I do think that there are opportunities to talk, for people to be together, but also very quickly in January, there'll be a need to act, and we'll have to have some of these conversations and debate in real time about how are we organizing, who are we organizing with, and how are we responding to these attacks in the most collaborative and forceful way.
Could I throw out one question? Well, one thing
I just want to say one quick thing about just building on that, which is that I think these are very interrelated in the sense that if people are organizing to prevent the deportation of their neighbors or their coworkers, through direct action and all kinds of tactics that we did. I think that was the best of the resistance. In the early days of the last Trump administration, that what I was saying earlier about like what are the animating values, building from action to narrative of like what do we believe in, who are we, those are very, very compatible. In fact, I think it's better than just sort of brainstorming slogans out in the ether, which isn't going to get us anywhere. It's how we tell the story of what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think is really going to matter, especially because they are going to break the country. I say this from Canada. I'm a U.S. citizen. No, you can't. I'm a dual citizen, by the way. This is why I butt into U.S. affairs. But also, we're all affected by what's going on there. And I know there's people listening around the world who feel, who know that this is a contagion, that Trump is emboldening, the worst parts of their own governments. But I think I'll leave it there because I interrupted.
Can I add one more? Interruption? I think as we're also assessing where the left's weaknesses and mistakes, Keeanga used the phrase resistance 2.0. And I think, a resistance is better than no resistance. But, I think we also really haven't assessed, what were the consequences of the outpouring of protest during the first Trump administration. And I think there were, I had debates with leftist comrades who I disagreed with. They said Trump at the first Trump administration was really good for the movement, right? It got people out. And my response was, yeah, it mobilized people, right? There were the biggest protests in history, mass mobilization. A lot of people protested for the first time, which is always great. It's great to get people into movements for the first time. But that mobilizing, there's the classic distinction between mobilizing and organizing. And folks were not able to be channeled into political homes. Very little infrastructure resulted from that. And that is a mistake I think we really need to learn. I've always said I'd rather have, 1,000 dedicated organizers in durable formation than 100,000 folks who pop off for one day. And I think that was, and the fact that folks were kind of remembering that fondly instead of thinking, God, what was really left behind? What was what infrastructure was there as a result is worrying to me, because we need to build infrastructure that can last through the ebbs and the flows, that can both be defensive and help protect what we can in a moment like this, but can be forward looking and get folks and hold folks even through periods of despair, disappointment, defeat, so that we can keep, fighting over the generations that we know we need to fight.
So this is all great. We have some really interesting questions from the audience, which I think are going to walk us into some even more specific territory. But two things I want to say is we have a number of people assembled on this call right now. I'm sure a lot of people who are on this call are already in organizing formations. But I think we can't afford to take for granted the fact that we have folks on this call right now. So if you're on this call and you don't have like an organizing home and you're not sure what to do, but you want to get connected and you want to stay connected, I'm going to commit. I should not put more on my plate, but I'm going to commit to work with Anthony and others to make sure that we can figure out what's the best way for you to get connected in the state, and to somehow take this group, like literally these people who are taking their time to listen to this call, to make sure that this continues, because we're not going to handle everything in an hour, hour and a half. But any assemblage of people who are serious, we got to get going. So I just want to commit to that. Please reach out to us, and we'll figure it out, and we'll talk over with Anthony how to do that part. The other thing I wanted to ask was, there's one thing we've talked about. There's a number of things on the table right now that Democrats could be doing, people in power could be doing right now. I mean, I know that, for example, I had a colleague who works in the sanctuary movement who said there's protections for mass pardons that could happen that could help people with these deportations. There's all kinds of steps that could be taken that I don't think are being taken. I mean, and I know it seems unlikely, even as these arrest warrants are being, delivered for Netanyahu, we're still seeing the Biden administration veto in the UN, calls for an arms embargo. But what do we think about the value of pushing for some of these things right now? Is that sort of not a good use of our energy, or is it like a way that we can kind of already roll into the momentum that we're going to need for January? Do folks have thoughts?
Or ask them not to start World War III as their final parting farewell. Yeah. I mean, I personally think it is, and I think especially the groups but all of us, but especially the groups who made this argument that we're voting for the terrain on which we fight, right? That we can push centrist Democrats. We might not love them, but we can get more done when they're in power. I think that's true. There's one in power right now. There's also one in power in California and another in New York State. I mean, there's no shortage of corporate Dems, who can be pushed by the left. And so, I do think that there should be a lot of pressure in this interim period, but also be afterwards to not make a sort of hashtag resistance alliance with Gavin Newsom, but to push him extremely hard.
But I guess this is I saw on one of the social media platforms that I was on, a kind of liberal lashing out in response to people saying Biden should be proactive, and the Democrats, of course, should be with the judges, appointing the judges, issuing pardons. And, this woman was like, all you quote unquote progressives, who weren't out pounding the pavement for Harris should just STFU, just shut up. And so this is part of the dynamic that I'm talking about, that without and it's not like we can stop everything, have a debate, have an assessment, vote, do we agree or not agree before we move on. I'm just saying, when you don't see anything happening, when major events are happening, that this is part of understanding why that is. So, of course, I think we should be pressuring this administration for its last 50 days or whatever to be doing everything that it can do. But it is curious to me that the actual, I'm a person who gets on the internet sometimes, I write some things, but it is the people who actually have relationships with people in the administration, who have organizations with budgets, not the little grassroots coalition that is just trying to keep its head above water and, trying to figure out how to keep their neighbors from being picked up. But, they're big groups that exist. And so that is part of the frustration. I feel frustrated this is part of the frustration, part of the question. The people who are telling us that on November 6th, we're ready to rock and roll. I know we are putting all of our focus into this election, but November 6th, we are ready to go. Not ready to go because we have 6 or 7 weeks, and it's really difficult to ascertain what exactly those forces are doing to at least build this part of the resistance.
I have to step in here and just plug that, the Debt Collective is actually organizing 2 actions in DC next month, focused on trying to get this administration to do as much as it can in terms of delivering debt relief. So we are actually, one of our big focuses is organizing older debtors. Older folks are actually the fastest group of student debtors. So we've got a bunch of folks heading to DC because the administration for now still has the authority to cancel people's debts based on their age. So, why not, as a parting gift, release millions of folks over the age of 50, 60, from their student loans? Because when the next administration comes in, we're not going to be talking about abolishing student debt. We're going to be talking about abolishing the Department of Education and having to suddenly pivot and protect this agency that actually has, been completely wasted, in my opinion, for the last 4 years. And, I think what you just said really resonates with me. Is there are a lot of people who should have some crumb of influence at this moment and aren't using it to push for everything that we need before, these folks determined to destroy the administrative state, except for the parts that they can use for punitive profit making, are coming in. But we do have to fight as much as we can till January 20th, and a lot of groups are doing the best they can, I think.
I do want to kind of turn to audience questions, and I'm Astra, I do want to direct the first one at you because I think you may have something to say about this. But we have one question from the audience that says, what do folks think about how to partner with labor? Are there specific labor leaders we should be uplifting? We need spokespeople that connect with working people. Do folks have thoughts? I don't know if you want to start off on that, Astra.
Well, you're actually in a labor union. I mean, I think, I think labor is incredibly important. Labor is going to be organizing on tougher terrain with the new administration as well, but and I know that there are debates about what strategy should be taken, but labor is one of the few areas of sort of the progressive movement broadly that has resources, billions of dollars in assets that could be mobilized to prioritize organizing, building up those numbers, fighting aggressively, and that seems like an urgent necessity to me. I definitely am watching, UAW with interest, and the calls for a general strike in 2028, which is very ambitious, but at least is kind of setting an interesting horizon. I do think that non-labor groups do have to think about ways to come into alignment. Debtor organizing, part of why I've stayed dedicated to it and why I think it's intriguing is that it complements labor organizing, right? I mean, the debts we take on are a form of wage theft. We're underpaid at the job, so we have to borrow for our basic necessities. So in that sense, working people are robbed twice. And, I think there's a lot of potential overlap, especially in the higher ed fight. So those are some of the labor unions we've been partnering with more closely. But the fact is also, in huge parts of the country, a lot of folks will never have a chance to join the labor movement because right to work laws, because of the way the economy has been structured. So I think we also need to start thinking about what it means for workers to organize without official legal recognition, other forms of solidarity unionism, and remembering that for a huge part of this country's history, labor organizing was illegal and people did it anyway. And those are kind of some of the lessons I think that we need to go back to.
Yeah. Do other people have thoughts? I have some AUP thoughts, but do other folks have some thoughts?
I just very quickly say, I think that it's also about doing more with the unions we have. I mean, I think that the sort of tradition of shop floor education has kind of gone dormant at a lot of unions, not all of them. But particularly where you see these rifts inside big unions, including UAW, where a significant portion did vote Trump, that I think there is an opportunity to do a lot more just popular education that isn't partisan, that is just like understand. There's going to be a lot to learn about, like looking at what they're doing with these huge clawbacks and with health. I mean, but just basic shop floor education, I think, is sort of under discussed and undervalued. So we've had like really significant breakthroughs, like 5 major unions signing a ceasefire, the call for ceasefire. But does that trickle down to the members, right? But the disruption piece is also huge, just in terms of unmasking who these people are in the Trump administration, because of course part of how they were elected was doing a better job of claiming that they are fighting for working people than the Democrats. And as soon as there's a disruptive strike, that is going to be unmasked very, very quickly. So that will matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I would say, one thing that's scary is that the NLRB is likely to really be gutted under this new administration. And that is something we're going to have to think about. Interestingly, though, that might weirdly also dialectically open up some other, protections for other kinds of organizing, other kinds of labor organizing. But to your point, Naomi, one of our members in the AUP, Devarian Baldwin, has talked about conceiving of a new shop floor, right? So part of the way that labor, both in higher education and elsewhere, has to really make sure that everybody understands the relevance is by talking about other sites. For example, in higher education, we have to be organizing for the common good around issues of housing, right? Around all kinds of issues that are not, counseling. I think in some ways the Chicago Teachers Union offers a really good example where during one of their campaigns, they refused to negotiate about their own salaries until some of these other more material needs that speak more directly to their communities were met. So I think that both in terms of making labor struggle, making the left, and translating it into really concrete demands in the way you talked about for people. Concrete demands, by the way, that are also speaking specifically to we're not abandoning people of color. We're not abandoning our queer folks. It's like all these fights. I think that's really important. And I just think that's certainly a lot of how we're thinking about our work in the AAUP as well. I wanted to ask, there's another question from an audience member here that I wanted to lift up because that talks about potential points of commonality and saying, how do we search for the points of commonality that we have with, I'm just going to read it. They're saying with some of the apolitical MAGA inclined people. Sincerity is good, but we need access. How do we access the people that we need to? When I first saw this, I thought about a quote that Keeanga actually wrote a few years ago in 2021, where she said, last fall, the number of Americans expressing a desire for the government to do more to solve the country's problem had risen to 54%. And then there was another, I think, poll that essentially said 71% of Republicans under 45 said they enforced increased public spending, which and even if it means raising taxes. Now, we may be in a different world than 2021, but that's a lot of people at that time.
It's the same world. If you look up the numbers, they're the same. They might even be a little bit higher.
So, I just wonder about points of commonality. If Keeanga, if you had anything to say about it.
Sometimes it's hard to find those points abstractly, and that it really is in moments of crisis and struggle that people can kind of see beyond the things that separate them. And I think one of the dynamics that we're going to see is a lot of people who in the abstract think about deportation, opening up space, think that it's fine, except for the people who work in the store in their neighborhood, or the family who lives next door to them. And so I think for a lot of people, that the reality of this has not really sunk in, and which just means that the opposition to it may bring together uh, a broad grouping of people. And what we have to resist within our movement is the hectoring of people who, oh, but you voted for Trump, so you're not actually allowed to be against this, or you think this, therefore you're not allowed to be opposed to this. And so sometimes with coalitions, it's, and I was talking to a student about this earlier, that there's a lot that students on campus disagree about. You've got the Young Democrats, you've got SJP, you've got and everything that falls in between. But what they might actually agree on is the right to be able to speak and the right to be able to organize and to assemble. And so that might be the basis upon which they come together to organize. And it can be narrow, but that is an entry point into a collaboration and struggle that opens up the possibility of then talking and engaging in different ways. But I think it's difficult to step back outside of that and, well, what are the points of commonality with, the MAGA neighbor down? That might be too abstract. But that's my.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think this is where the basic, like the material focus, can work. I mean, you're talking to folks who, are organizing in, as I said, mobile home parks, right? Places where there are lots of places where the community has very, your neighbors have different opinions than you. This is where sometimes electoral organizing can be good. Again, in states that have ballot measures, sometimes those ballot measures are really clarifying, right? The billionaire is paying to repeal the capital gains tax. Hey, this isn't about Democrats. This is about the rich trying to screw us all and defund schools, defund healthcare. And those can be, I think, opportunities to, go in communities and talk to neighbors. I mean, the Debt Collective began organizing folks who were defrauded by predatory for-profit colleges, trade schools, right? Vocational schools, exactly the kind of schools that this new administration is just going to be loving up, right? The people who we started organizing with came from all over the political spectrum, but what they had in common was that they had been defrauded. And then that became a point of contact to have bigger conversations that ultimately led to, why isn't education free? Why isn't it a right for everybody? So I do think the material, is it, the pocketbook issues. And that's why when these Democratic consultants are like, oh, we're going to talk populist, they don't really mean it, right? And the people who mean it and will really talk in a straight, honest way, are not the folks running the party right now. But there are people doing that, and it's not a silver bullet, right? Because people's minds don't change with one conversation, but it can be transformative if you take the time to do it, and I've seen that.
But I think what Astra just said is really important. Is people's ideas are very fluid, and they're changing. Everything is changing constantly, and I think that what we're saying is that we have to be open to that. We have to be open to people. We have to be open to the capacity for people to change their minds and not just write people off or create 1,000 different barriers to becoming involved in a struggle. That if you don't believe this, and that, you're not welcome here, because they will be welcome somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a struggle over the disenfranchised, the disenchanted, the, ordinary people who are horrified about what's happening. There's a struggle. And so we're either going to try to influence that, we're either going to build structures that bring them in, and be open to learning from them. We're either going to do that, or we're going to suffer the consequences of being small and all the problems that come when your movement is too small at the historical and political moments when it matters.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the absolute key point, and it's why these issues, like, it can feel like, oh, you're just turning on each other in a time of crisis, like to talk about these issues or this self-criticism about left culture. It matters because things are going to get so bad so quickly. Like we can think about it as organizers about how Trump is a shock machine. This is the strategy. They're going to try to do everything all at once, but things are going to start breaking all at once, right? I personally think them putting the richest man in the world in charge of the worst austerity the United States has ever seen might be a bad idea. Like, I think that could backfire. Actually having Elon Musk at the wheel of massive layoffs and like cutting off people's food stamps, it's going to be, and if we can't tell a story about that, about class war, what are we doing, But also, exactly as Keeanga said, as we've all been saying, like, how do we catch people when they realize what it is they signed on to? And also not just Trump voters, non-voters, people who voted for the Democrats because they understood that it was strategic, but they didn't enjoy it. It's going to get really dire. So these investments that we can make in organizing the structures, which Astra's already doing, and so many people are already doing, but also in really thinking about how we treat each other and how we're going to navigate the first time there are disagreements, and how we have, not everybody has to have the most annoying conversations, but somebody has to, And, just to clarify, I think sometimes when we talk like this, people think we're saying like we need to make common cause with Nazis. No, that's not what we're saying. We're talking about people who've voted Democrat their whole life, and this time decided to raise the middle finger, right?
Yeah.
Or the 90 million who didn't vote at all, right? I mean, there's people who just are like completely disengaged and not in a strong political camp. But I mean, I think we're hammering home the same point, but I think this is why, like, DSA is brilliant. We need DSA, but not everybody's a socialist, and there needs to be infrastructure that reaches folks where they are. And, to go back to a point Naomi made, it's not weak. It's not weak to frame your message, to start with curiosity, to see people as holding, sometimes contradictory views. It's strategic and really necessary. I think there's a lot to grieve about this moment, but I actually think there's a huge amount of potential. I totally agree about billionaires imposing a project of austerity. Like, there's a lot of material for us to work with if we can actually get disciplined ourselves.
I think I know we're getting the time, but this is such an important point that they're acting like they have a mandate and they don't. I think he's under 50%. I think that people are pissed and angry. He taps into that. Nobody is voting for Trump for his robust policy platform. And so I think that no one expects prices to be high, for government services to be completely shut down, and for them to just keep on, to be unaffected by that. And so it means that there will be a tremendous amount of political volatility. And this is the challenge for the left, is how do you match that? How do you meet that? And what is your response to that, as people are breaking in all different kinds of directions, in outrage, radicalization, desperate to know, like, what do we do next? Like, what kind of left, broadly construed progressive movement is going to be there to receive them?
just I don't, I it kind of on the same point. There's a place I hang out in New York that is where everybody in that place is like are immigrant Black and Latino men from places like Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and so forth. And I was hanging out with them. We talked a little bit of politics, but beforehand, and I was scared after the election to ask to talk about the election. But I did go in there a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to, I'm not gonna name him, but I was talking to my friend. He's a young Jamaican guy, and Trump came on the television in this place, and he was like, man, I was scared he was gonna be like, yeah, and he was like, nah, he was like, man, that guy's such a clown, and I was kind of, I ain't gonna lie, I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh wow, I said, you don't rock with Trump. He was like, he said, no, he said, none of us in here rock with Trump. He goes, but he also said, none of us in here voted.
Mm-hmm.
He said, nobody in here voted, man. We about that money. And I said, but you don't like Trump? He was like, hell no. He said, after the election, it's tense in here. The vibe is tense.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are people that we should have already won. And the question for me is, those people are winnable. Those are people, but the question is, what kind of movement is going to win them, right? Is it going to be me going in there using a whole bunch of wild scholarly terms that people don't understand, shaming people, finger wagging, all this kind of stuff, or is it going to be something else? And I just, in the same vein, we're about at time, and so I don't know if anyone has any other closing thoughts, but I just would say I said before, anybody who's on this call, if you're in that place where you're like, I just want to be. I want to be with some other people. I'm not sure what to do. Reach out. We're going to figure it out. Y'all, some of y'all who already know what things that you're doing, you got to be part of that too now. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has a closing thought, but
I've got a quick one. Which is, what we've been talking about when we make a distinction between organizing and, just throwing everything at one big demo. We're talking about building a movement, right? And a movement that is not single issue, that is guided by a different worldview, that can grow big enough that it can provide a credible vision for how we get from here to somewhere very, very different, right? And the reason why it matters that we not self-marginalize is that it's only a large movement that can be credible in the face of the forces that we're up against and the money that we're up against. So that's part of how, one of the questions that we had was, isn't this sort of ideological projection to think that people who voted for Trump might move to the left? I think people made a calculation that he was offering something more credible than us, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily better, but just more credible, that he was more likely to deliver this sort of sadistic quick fixes that aren't going to fix anything than that we're going to deliver eco-socialism. And that's not a crazy calculation given the state of the left. So this is why we need to build. But the other piece of it is about being in a movement is that feeling of overwhelm that we have, and also that feeling of fatigue that Keeanga mentioned, which comes from the reality of this grinding culture layered on top of a pandemic and all the other things that people are carrying, is that in a movement, we can prioritize, we can strategize. Not everybody has to do everything, right? We divide and conquer, and also we can tag out, right? That taking a rest if you need a rest when you're part of a movement doesn't mean giving up, because there are other people who are moving when you need to rest and are able to hold you. So, being tired is understandable, and that is why you should join a movement, not why you shouldn't. And thanks for tuning in. The response to this was really beautiful and overwhelming, and I just love talking with all of you.
All right, cool. We will see y'all out there. Much respect. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Let's take care of more people. All right.